Well, happy Shavuot, everybody. We're just so happy to have you here today. And Todd is on the line with us, and he's going to be helping with a slide or two. This is totally surprise to him, but anyway, it was Todd and his friends there in Colorado that have put together the structure for this teaching today, and it's called Rightly Dividing the Word of Truth. Obedience. It's on obedience, and it's either Shema or Shema, however you might say it. Todd, how do you say that? How do you say it, Shema?
I say Shema.
Okay. But anyway, it's a teaching on obedience, and you might wonder, well, what do we need to learn about obedience? Well, there might be some surprises today. So the question is, what is obedience? Is it this? Is it being on some puppet strings and you just do what you're told? Or is obedience being caught inside of a glass bulb and you can't do anything but whatever you get away with in there? Or maybe we should look at what our little birdies have to say. What are some other words for obedience? Oh, Jeanette, can you help me with some of these words? Acquiescence, is that what it says?
It looks like it. It's not a word I use too often, but yeah. And submission and conformity, docility, compliance, submissiveness, deference, and observance.
Yeah, maybe. Go ahead, Rory.
It's acquiescence.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so that's what the birdies say. That's what obedience is. But oh my goodness, what is disobedience? Well, is it this, somebody plugging their ears so they don't hear and they don't have to obey? And does that just not remind you of Jonah? He didn't want to listen. He didn't want to go to Nineveh, so he just plugged his ears and he got on the boat and he ended up inside the big fish. Okay, so what is disobedience? Well, our little birdies have this to say. Let's see if we can get through these big, long words and pay attention to them. Defiance, insubordination. We're going to hear that word later on. Non-compliance, rebellion, contumacy, Oh, Rory, help me out with that one.
Recalcitrance. No, the R is silent. It's recalcitrance.
Oh.
Okay. Unruliness, waywardness. Oh my goodness, we need our dictionary. But anyway, could it be any of those things? Wow. So there's just going to be some interesting things to look at today. But here on slide number 4, why should we show our obedience to the word of our one true creator, Yahuwah, our Elohim? Why should we do that? Or, the question is, could we get away with disobedience just like once in a while and it wouldn't really matter? Like, could we just do that, just be like the world a little bit? Well, there are some words of wisdom, and these words aren't from the scriptures, but they certainly do speak of the scriptures principles. The only true way to search the scriptures is to lay down every prejudice, every preconceived opinion at the very door of investigation, and then enter into the work with an eye single to the glory of Yahuwah, with an understanding open to conviction and a heart softened to believe what Yahuwah says to you, and then you're supposed to do it, right? So those are good words of wisdom. And I just have a note there that most of the scriptures are going to be from the Scriptures 2009 version, okay, unless otherwise noted. Sometimes I'm going to be using King James and try to work this with Todd. But anyway, there are some requirements for scripture studies. And this is just a review of how to do a good scripture study. You need to learn to read enough content of the scriptures, and you have to read very carefully. And we also have to learn how to read in context. And of course, if you're doing that, you need to pay attention to grammar as well. So it's back to those grade 10 English lessons. We need to learn to keep the timing events of Bible stories in order, according to the order of the verses. Now, on a study of obedience, we don't really have those kinds of timing events, but if you were doing calendar studies, you want to keep all of the events of the Bible story in order. That will be a big clue on how to understand calendar. And one thing that is often forgotten is that we've got to use our logic and our common sense more than ever before. You know, how many people say it just always made sense to me to start the day in the morning, but I was taught it started at sunset. So I just followed the crowd, right? Use your logic and your common sense. It usually works out pretty good. And number 5, we must remember there is not one idle word in Scripture. Everything that is written down is according to divine inspiration, and it's for the edification of truth. And that's especially true for this topic on obedience. Number 7, learn how to use the Hebrew and the Greek definitions properly and consistently. We're going to do some work in that area today. And expect and insist to establish at least 2 or 3 firm witnesses to establish any new truth, okay? That's important too. Number 9, expect the traditions around Scripture to be clearly exposed for the darkness that they represent. We have found there's so many traditions wrapped around Scripture, and oh my, you have to search for truth until you can peel away that tradition. And the last one, number 10, understand that there is a fuller restoration of all truths according to the Torah, the prophets, and our Melchizedek priest. There's always more to look at. Oh, yes, there's always questions. Todd said there's questions. Obedience leads to what? Disobedience leads to what? Where did disobedience begin? And we haven't addressed all of these questions today, but these are all questions that could be explored in another teaching. But what do the Scriptures say about Noah, Abraham, and Moshe, about being obedient or disobedient? And the most important question of all, what does Yahuwah say about obedience, or about these 3 men and their obedience? Well, Noah, let's just take a look at him. Was he righteous? In Genesis 6, verses 8, 9, and 22, it says, but Noah found grace in the eyes of Yahuwah. Noah was a righteous man and perfect in his generations. Noah walked with Elohim, and Noah did according to all that Elohim commanded him. So he did. And don't forget, this is a long time before Mount Sinai, where Yahuwah actually spoke the 10 commandments to a whole multitude of people. So Noah knew what was going on. And so did Abraham. He comes a little bit later in history. Was he righteous? Let's look and see in Genesis 26, verses 4 and 5. And I shall increase your seed like the stars of the heavens, and I shall give all these lands to your seed, and in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Why? Because Abraham obeyed my voice and guarded my charge, my commands, my laws, and my Torah. I want you to watch that word guarded. It's going to be showing up a little bit later on. What about Moshe? Was he righteous? I know you all know the answer, but in Numbers 12:7 and as well Hebrews 3:2, not so with my servant Moses. He is trustworthy in all my house. Remember, Yahuwah spoke to Moses face to face there in Exodus 33:11. And he was the only person buried by Yahuwah. What an honor. And he stood with Elijah at the transfiguration and many, many more things. Absolutely, Moshe was a righteous person. Well, how does being obedient align with following Yahuwah's blood-ratified covenant that is found between Genesis 1:1 to Exodus 24:11? We call this the Book of the Covenant. We're not going into that detail too much today, but is it a salvational issue to be obedient to all of the covenant that is given to us by our Maker, who happens to be the creator of everybody? He's our Ruach, Yahuwah, and our Elohim. And is there one path that's better? Is it better to go with his instructions? Go his direction, or maybe take another path and fall off the cliff? Well, yes, every word in scripture is important, especially every word in the book of the covenant. Okay, Todd, if you're there, I just want to let you know we're on slide 10, and the title of this slide says Being Prepared for Our Bridegroom. I just want you to go over these Greek definitions of what oida, it means intuitive knowledge, and gnosko means objective knowledge or required knowledge. Can you please expand on that for us, Todd?
Charlene, I don't have that in front of me. I don't have the PowerPoint in front of me. Go ahead. You go ahead and explain those to you, and I'm going to just set the phone down for a second, and I'm going to go grab it real quick, okay?
Oh, no, you don't have to set the phone down. I just want you to tell us what you mean in your heart with intuitive knowledge, and what you mean, how that's different from objective knowledge. I just want just what's in your heart.
Well, intuitive knowledge is following, the Ruach HaKodesh and letting the knowledge of Yahweh speak to us, not the knowledge of continued, the knowledge of men and following the tradition of men. I was never, indoctrinated by the knowledge of men. My knowledge and everything that has come to me in such a short amount of time has been through the Spirit of Yahweh and the Spirit of truth, and walking in the truth of the Word, and not straying from the Word of the truth and going into all these other different interpretations of where it all comes from man. It's going directly to the source and going to the foundation of where it came from. That's where the knowledge is going to the foundation. Etymology and the study and the meaning of the truth of the Word. So I go all the way back to the foundation of it, and I think I've said that many, many times on Covenant Calendar and when I've been on and studying and going to the foundation.
Absolutely. And what we have found is that a lot of people that just come to the truth first time without all of that other luggage or baggage, they just understand truth because truth just rings to them. That is so neat to hear that. Well, Todd, you have here Revelation 3:3. It says, remember then how you have received and heard and watched and repent. And then Revelation 16:15, blessed is he who is staying awake and guarding his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. So there's something here about when the bridegroom is, about to come and he's getting his bride ready. There's something about guarding. Anyway, this is how Yahuwah's covenant begins to align with obedience. It's with a guard. We are to watch and guard Yahuwah's covenant and not man's times or traditions. Well, we're just moving on here, and we have Matthew 7:13-14. And Todd says, when it comes to being obedient, these are some of their favorite verses in scriptures to go to and to understand truth versus tradition. And it's Matthew 7:13-14. I'll read it. And then we're going to follow up with a little word from Todd on the 10 virgins. Enter in through the narrow gate, because the gate is wide and the way is broad that leads to destruction. And there are many who enter in through it, because the gate is narrow and the way is hard pressed, which leads to life. And there are few who find it. How easy it is to find that wide gate, but the narrow one, you have to really know what you're looking for. Todd, do you want to expand just a little bit on the parable of the 10 virgins, maybe for a moment?
The parable of the 10 virgins is one of my favorite. And the 5 wise, they had the oil. And a lot of people like to refer to that to being the 5 books, the oil of the 5 books. But I like to refer to it as what I've learned as far as being part of Covenant Calendar is the Torah of the timing of Yahweh's blood ratified covenant calendar and the timing. That's what I refer to it is because when the 5 wise virgins, they had the oil, they knew the time, they knew Yahweh's perfect timing, they were waiting for the bridegroom, they were ready for the bridegroom. The 5 unwise were lazy. They probably were following traditions. They were probably following the Pharisees and the scribes. They didn't have the timing. They were keeping the feast of the Jews, not the feast of Yahweh. And when they went out to buy the oil, they came back. What did they hear? They heard, "Sorry, go for me. I never knew you." The door is closed. And once that door is shut, do you think Yahweh's going to reopen it? He's going to reopen it 1,000 years later for judgment. And they're going to hear, "Go for me again. I never knew you." And because many people will say, "Well, didn't we prophesy in your name? And didn't we cast out demons in your name?" You have to go back to that scripture when they said that. Well, again, he's going to tell them, "Go for me, I never knew you." Because they weren't keeping his times. They weren't keeping the right proper Sabbath. The Sabbath is a seal on our mind. The 7 high Shabbat today, Shavuot is a high Shabbat, and it's a seal. It's a seal that he knows us, that we worship him. When Yeshua told the woman at the well that you're not going to come worship me on this mountain or at this place, because it's not going to be there. The Father's looking for those that are going to worship him in spirit and in truth. And the truth is Yahweh's blood ratified book of the covenant, the blood ratified covenant calendar, his times, the Sabbath, and his name is our seal upon us.
Wow. So I think what you're saying is that if we want to be on time for the bridegroom, that we better have the right calendar too. And that's kind of important. And I think it's kind of important to be obedient to that. But anyway, it goes on to say that Yahusha used many parables to speak to his disciples, just like this one. In Matthew 13, Yahusha said all this to the crowds in parables, and he did not speak to them without a parable, so that what was spoken by the prophet might be filled, saying, "I shall open my mouth in parables. I shall pour forth what has been hidden from the foundation of the world." Thank you, Katie. So I'm watching the clock as much as I can. All right, let's keep going here. There's a prophecy of Isaiah that is fulfilled in 6:9, also in Matthew 13. Let's read it. "Because of this, I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. And in them the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled, which says, hearing you shall hear."
No, you guys go ahead. I'll talk to you.
Bye, Todd.
Okay, honey.
Boy, that was short. That
Bye.
was short,
Love you.
Katie. If he comes back, just let us know. Okay. "Hearing you shall hear, and by no means shall understand, and seeing you shall see, and by no means perceive. For the heart of this people has become thickened, and their ears are hard of hearing, and their eyes they should have closed, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, lest they should understand with their heart and turn back, and I heal them." In Jeremiah 33:3, "Call unto me, and I shall answer you and show you great and inaccessible matters which you have not known." Isaiah 30, verses 20 and 21, "Though Yahuwah gave you bread of adversity and water of affliction, your teacher shall no longer be hidden." I like that. Your teacher shall no longer be hidden, but your eyes shall see your teacher, and your ears will hear a word behind you saying, this is from the teacher, "This is the way, walk in it. And whenever you turn to the right, and whenever you turn to the left." So our teacher is going to teach us. Jeanette, would you like to do this slide? Slide number 13.
Okay. So the dictionary definitions from Webster's on the word obedience: it's an act or instance of obeying. It's the quality or state of being obedient. Obedient, submissive to the restraint or command or authority, willing to obey. Obey out of love for Yahuwah, or scriptural love is qualified. Obeisance, it's a movement of the body made in token of respect or submission, like a bow. Acknowledgement of another's superiority or importance, homage. Then there's the words obey, obeyed, and obeying. To follow the commands or guidance of, to confirm to or comply with an order, to behave obediently.
So those are dictionary definitions from Webster's. I'm just going to ask Eddie if she could make sure all the mics are closed that don't need to be opened. Thank you. And now we'll just do a little bit on dictionary definitions from the Hebrew and the Greek. And as you can see, obey, obeyed, obeyeth, obeying, obedience, they're all together. And in the Hebrew, 8085 is the one word number. It's used to, look at that, 1160 times. Shema. It is a primitive root. It means to hear intelligently, often with implication of attention and obedience, causatively to tell, etc. So to hear intelligently, when someone says, what is the Hebrew meaning of obey? There it is, to hear intelligently. That's something most people don't expect to hear for a definition. But obeisance, that's a little bit different. 7812 from the Hebrew, used 172 times, a primitive root to depress, prostrate, especially reflexive in homage to royalty, to an Elohim, to our Elohim. So it's quite a bit different. In being obedient, there will be obeisance. But look at the Greek word for obedience. And I'd like you to notice the first three definitions. There's actually four, but Greek has more. That doesn't mean it's better. It just means it has more. And notice the first three definitions differ from 5293 at the very bottom. So the first one is obedience 5218. I'm not even going to attempt how to say these in Greek. I'll slaughter it, but it means attentive hearkening. Okay, sounds a bit like hear intelligently, right? Compliance or submission. Obedience as 5219. Okay, to hear under as a subordinate. Here we go, to listen attentively. There it is again. To heed or conform to a command or authority. To hearken, be obedient and obey. I don't really like to use obedient and obey as definitions for obedience. That doesn't make sense. But anyway, those are other words that are used in the King James. Then we have obedience in the Greek 5255. Again, attentively listening, by implication being submissive. Okay, all basically about the same. Attentive hearkening, attentive listening, about the same as hearing intelligently. Now there's one more, 5293. Two definitions here: to subordinate, reflexively to obey. We're going to go over this quite a bit coming up, and you'll see the reasons why. Why is one of those definitions different than the other three? Okay, I'd like to go through Strong's comparison of the Hebrew for the word obedient, and the next one's going to be for the Hebrew obedient. Greek obedient. That's what I meant. And I think Jeanette will help me with the Greek. But on this one, I want you to note that in Strong's, the word obedient is found only 8 times in Hebrew. It's this word, 8085. Okay, there's only one number that's ever used, not 3, not 4, not more than that. And here's the definition again, Shema. It's the primitive root to hear intelligently. But don't forget, this word number is used 1160 times with other words besides obedient. But let's read the scriptures that do use the word obedient. And does it surprise you? There's only 8 of them in the King James. Okay, I just want to go through them quickly. Exodus 24:7, and he took the book of the covenant and read in the audience of the people, and they said, all that Yahuwah hath said, we will do and be obedient. This is the first time the word obedient shows up in the Torah, right there with Moses at the bottom of the mount. Numbers 27:20, and thou shalt put some of thine honor upon him, that all the congregation of the children of Israel may be obedient. Deuteronomy, when thou art in tribulation, if thou turn to Yahuwah thy Elohim, and shalt be obedient unto his voice, he will not forsake thee. That's in chapter 4, verse 30. Then in chapter 8, verse 20, so shall ye perish, because you would not be obedient unto the voice of Yahuwah your Elohim. In 2 Samuel 22:45, strangers shall submit themselves unto me. As soon as they hear, they shall be obedient unto me. Strangers. Proverbs 25:12, as an earring of gold and as an ornament of fine gold, so is a wise reprover upon an obedient ear. Very interesting proverb. Isaiah 1:19, if ye be willing and obedient, you shall eat the good of the land. And Isaiah 42:24, for they would not walk in his ways, neither were they obedient unto his law. Only 8 scriptures in all of the Hebrew. Oh, pardon me, we're going to do Hebrew obeisance before we get to the Greek. So let me just take care of this while we're here. So in the King James references for obeisance, these are found only in the Torah and the prophets, okay? And there is the definition: to prostrate, to be in homage or royalty. And we're going to say to our Elohim. In other words, homage and royalty to Yahuwah, not to any other Elohim, to worship, bow, and bow down in obeisance and reverence, to fall down, to stoop, or to crouch. So a little bit different. It's an action of you are obedient, and this is what you do in response. Only nine times. Genesis 37:7, you'll remember this. And behold, your sheaves stand round about, and make obeisance to my sheep. That was Joseph giving his dream. And then it says again in verse 9, and he dreamed yet another dream. The sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. Genesis 43:28, thy servant our father, he is yet alive. And they bowed down their heads and made obeisance. These 3 verses are all about Joseph. Exodus 18:7, just before Mount Sinai. And Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and did obeisance and kissed him. Well, he's giving homage to his father-in-law, not worshiping as an Elohim. 2 Samuel 1, verse 2, and it came to pass on the 3rd day that, behold, a man came out of the camp from Saul when he came to David, that he fell to the earth and did obeisance. 2 Samuel 14:4, almost the same. And when the woman of Tekoa spoke to the king, she fell on her face to the ground and did obeisance. 2 Samuel 15:5, and it was so that when any man came nigh to him, we're talking about Absalom, to do obeisance, he put forth his hand. I bet you all remember that story. And in 1 Kings 1:16, and Bathsheba bowed and did obeisance unto, it was David the king. One more verse, 2 Chronicles 24:17. Now after the death of Jehoiada came the princes of Judah and made obeisance to the king. So there's not a whole lot there about obeisance unto our Elohim, but just to give you an idea, it is a stooping down, a crouching, a bowing down, and giving homage or honor to somebody that is above you. Okay, Jeanette, can you do these Strong's comparisons of the Greek on the word obedient? And then after that, we'll look on the word obedience.
Okay, so first of all, a note. In Strong's, the word obedient is found 8 times in the New Testament, or the Restored Covenant, in Greek, using 4 numbers. So there you can see the 4, 5219, 5218, 5255, and 5293. And she has a star here by this one. 5293 is in red here. They use the word obedience. It also uses the same Strong's number as obedient, but used only 1 time in 1 Corinthians 14:34 in a very much different context. So there are 8 Greek scriptures for obedient in the KJV. Acts 6:7. And the word of Elohim increased, disciples multiplied, and a great company of the priests were obedient to the faith. And Romans 15:18. For I will not dare to speak of any of those things which Yahusha hath not wrought by me, to make the Gentiles obedient by word and deed. 2 Corinthians 2, verse 9. For to this end also did I write, that I might know the proof of you, whether ye be obedient in all things. Okay, in Ephesians 6:5. Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters. And Philippians 2:8. And being found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. And Titus 2, verse 5 and verse 9. To be discreet, chaste, keepers at home, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of Elohim be not blasphemed. And verse 9, exhort servants to be obedient unto their own masters. 1 Peter 1:14. As obedient children, not fashioning yourselves according to the former lusts in your ignorance. And here's a note, again, referring to the 1 Corinthians 14:34, this word will be addressed separately.
So thank you, Jeanette. So why don't we just do a comparison between that and that was obedient, and this is obedience. Let's just do a little comparison there.
Okay, so obedience is found 12 times in the restored covenant, like this. So obedience is hupako, and it comes from the word for attentive, or meaning hearkening. And by implication, it means compliance or submission. And there's a note here for 5218. It says all references are found in the restored covenant and to be reviewed on the next slide for content. There's a whole list of scriptures there. Were you meaning to read them out, Charlene?
Yeah, well, I'll do it on the next slide.
Okay, and otherwise, here's our word obedience of 5293, hupotasso in Greek. And it comes from, of course, two other root words, but the first definition is subordinate. And then the second definition means reflexively to obey. So it means to obey, but reflexively. Okay, and this is the only definition found in one reference that does not fit the context for this study on obedience, including the following verses. And that was, again, 1 Corinthians 14:34, and it will be reviewed soon.
Yes, but first of all, we're going to look at these other ones because they're not that very many. I thought there would have been more words in both the Old and the New Testament, but let's just go through these. This is for 5218, just to get an idea of what these verses are actually saying. Romans 1:5, by whom we have received grace and apostleship for obedience to the faith among all nations for his name. Romans 5:19, for as by one man's disobedience many were made sinners, so by the obedience of one shall many be made righteous. And Romans 6:16, 19, and 26. I love this one. Know ye not that to whom you yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants ye are to whom ye obey, whether of sin unto death, or of obedience unto righteousness. For your obedience is come abroad unto all men. I am glad, therefore, on your behalf, but yet I would have you wise unto that which is good, and simple concerning evil. But now is made manifest, and by the scriptures of the prophets, according to the commandment of the everlasting Elohim, made known to all the nations for the obedience of faith. Really nice verses there in Romans 6. We'll finish up these last little bit here in 2 Corinthians 7:15. And his inward affection is more abundant towards you, whilst he remembereth the obedience of you all, how with fear and trembling you received him. 2 Corinthians 10:5-6, casting down imaginations and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Yahusha, and having in a readiness to revenge all disobedience when your obedience is fulfilled. Philippians 21, having confidence in thy obedience, I wrote unto thee, knowing that thou wilt also do more than I say. Hebrews 5:8, though he were a son, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered. And 1 Peter 1:2 is the last one, elect according to the foreknowledge of Elohim the Father, through sanctification of the Ruach unto obedience and sprinkling of the blood of Yahushua HaMashiach. Now, you've heard all of those verses read. Let's compare the one verse that uses 5293 in 1 Corinthians 14:34, and I want you to see if you can tell a difference in the content and the context. Let your women keep silence in the churches, for it is not permitted unto them to speak, but they are commanded to be under obedience, as also saith the law. I hope that you see that there's something different going on here with 1 Corinthians 14 than all the other scriptures that we just read in the New Testament. Well, in case you didn't get it, Jeanette's going to walk us through a little bit of what is actually happening with 1 Corinthians 14:34 and this word obedience. Go ahead, Jeanette.
Okay, yes, it is time to address this. 1 Corinthians 14:34 and this word obedience. It's about, should women be silent in the church? And this is a very controversial topic, but let's have a nutshell investigation at this point in this study. I just want to say that the nutshell version hardly does justice on this whole topic, okay? We're just trying to single out one verse out of multiple verses in the scriptures on this topic. This is a humongous topic or study, actually. It could be as big as the moon study, or, about following, who's the false Jews today and all of the secret societies. I mean, this could be humongous. We've been fed a lot of dogma, and some of it has shown, where scriptures have been tampered a little bit. And this is one of the cases as well in quite a few scriptures, actually. So we need to be diligent and let the whole Bible or the whole of the scriptures, explain every verse and take it in context. So let's look for context. If Paul allowed women to pray and to prophesy, then in what sense did he mean that women should keep silent in the meeting of the church? Because the usage of the word obedience in this passage is very different from the other 11 scriptures, it is necessary to check the context of the content in this chapter. So let's see if we can understand what Paul was really trying to portray. I'm just waiting for it to come up. It's a little bit slow. Okay, so first of all, let's check the KJV again to see if any words need to be carefully eliminated. If you had noticed even previously when Charlene read it, and here it is again, look for italicized words that we know are what has been added in. So there it is. Let your women keep silence in the churches, for it is not permitted unto them to speak. But, and here it is in tiny print because it's in italics, they are commanded to be, and we put under as well. That is not in the interlinear anywhere. Okay, so if it's saying, but they are commanded to be obedient, as also saith the law. Anyway, note the definitions for this word obedient and the placement. Oh, sorry, this, we can't say obedient there. Okay, for the word that is G5293 and the placement of the definition obey. Okay, so here we are, the same word. The first definition of this Greek word that they're trying to transliterate here, the first definition is subordinate, and the second one is to obey. Okay, so right there is a clue as to whether they chose, the right word to put within the KJV. And next, now how this verse reads using Strong's first definition. Let's just try that again. You have to Switch slides. Okay, so let's
Yep,
eliminate
it's coming.
let's eliminate the added words and insert the first definition of subordinate that is suggested by Strong's. So let's try this reading. Let your women keep silence in the churches, for it is not permitted unto them to speak, but to be either saying under subordination, or it would read, but to be subordinate, as also saith the law. And the question here, does subordinate fit the context of this verse any better? And maybe not. And why? Let's check another source and see. Remember, this was from Strong's definition. Okay, we're going forward. Okay, the third look at this. Let's choose the suggestion from the Bible Hub Interlinear for the wording to be in submission, meaning that each one submits themselves as under the law. Okay, so if you can kind of see that, I know it's small, but this is a screen print of this word, or of this scripture, 1 Corinthians 14:34. And our English is the red. Okay, and it would read, the women in the churches, let them be silent, not for it is allowed to them to speak, but to be in submission, as also the law says. So here the key way to express that would be saying to be in submission. And that means that you put yourself, submitting yourself, and the rest of the verse says under the law. So before we make a final decision, let's check the context of the full passage. Okay. So there's many verses ahead of this verse that is actually talking about the order of assembly meetings, and it begins back in verse 26. So chapter 14, verse 26, and this is how it would read. How is it then, brethren, when you come together, every one of you have a psalm, have a doctrine, have a tongue, have a revelation, or have an interpretation? And let all things be done unto edifying. Okay, so to keep order in the assembly, if there is no one to interpret, then the speaker is to keep silent. Verse 27, if any man speak in an unknown tongue, let it be by two, or at the most by three, and that by course, and let one interpret. But if there be no interpreter, let him keep silence in the church, and let him speak to himself and to Elohim. Let the prophets speak 2 or 3, and let the other judge. Okay, so that was one group where he's telling those people to be silent as well. Okay, what about to keep order in the assembly? Those that prophesy should do so one by one to avoid confusion. Verse 30, if anything be revealed to another that sitteth by, let the first hold his peace. For ye may all prophesy one by one, that all may learn, and all may be comforted. And the spirits of the prophets are subject to the prophets. For Yahuwah is not the author of confusion, but of peace, as in all churches of the saints. We'd probably word that a little different here in our camp. However, the third column here now is speaking about women. To keep order in the assembly, this is the third group he's mentioning. Women that have questions for their husbands are to seek these answers at home to avoid additional confusion to whoever is speaking. And we will explain this further as well. But verse 34 reads, let your women keep silence in the churches, for it is not permitted unto them to speak, but to be in submission, as also the law says. And if they will learn anything, let them ask their husbands at home, for it is a shame for women to speak in the church. Okay. But why would or why should women be corrected? Well, there's many aspects to this whole story. Let's start with this one. Paul was speaking to the church at Corinth of Greece. And are you familiar with what Corinth stood for, what kind of a place it was. And if you don't, I highly recommend you go and search and find out what life was like in Corinth at the time of Paul. It was a place of extreme pagan worship culture and a constant influx of foreigners who participated in it all. Paul won many converts there, yet it came with many questions and letters, etc. The Bible does not include the letters that Corinth wrote to Paul, but we only see the letters that Paul wrote as his answers back to them. Therefore, much information is missing from the letter correspondence and teachings that Paul would have given over many months. Some of the women may have been reverting to the model of pagan worship. This is a huge aspect right here. Disrupting the service with their loud voices or loud noises. I'm just going to admit, not sure if someone's there. Culturally, the only way women were allowed to participate was by wailing and making high-pitched cries called ululations. Women practiced this for thousands of years, for both joy and for grief. And among pagans, the men ministered and offered the sacrifices, while the women provided the sound effects. Can you see how that might have affected the early church? Well, Paul now expected all to minister, but in an orderly way, without the chaos of their pagan past. Besides this, he also encouraged women, as they were generally uneducated. He counseled them to ask their husbands at home, in verse 35, to catch them up if they desired to learn, and not interrupt with their many questions during the assembly to add confusion and disorder.
Well, that says a lot, Jeanette. Do you have more to share with us?
Well, there is a huge amount. Only going to share a tiny little bit of it here today, though. But you know what? This does warrant a whole huge study on its own, and I really hope that that can be done. I know we have two ladies who are going to be working on this for Sukkot, April and Maxie, and you know, we pray for them because this is a huge topic. Anyways, a lot of my information came from the book, Why Not Women? There's many sources out there, but I really like this one. David Hamilton has actually done a whole thesis study on this one topic. So let's just have a look here. Paul corrects three groups as clarified in Why Not Women? Now, this book was written by two men, Lauren Cunningham and David Hamilton. First of all, many overlook the fact that this command does not stand alone. As we just read previously, Paul also had similar corrective words to two other groups in the same chapter, in which the context is about coming together for worship in an orderly manner. Paul said to be silent to all three of these groups. Number one, those who spoke in tongues is in verse 28. Two is those speaking to the prophets in verse 30. And thirdly, to the women in verse 34. Okay, so let's look at the whole context. Otherwise, it is just simply not proper learning. Okay, the next point. In all three of these verses, be silent had to do with taking turns, listening to one another, and being self-controlled so everyone could be strengthened and edified. And that makes full sense, doesn't it? Women were in all three of these groups, as Paul had already declared in verse 26, that when you assemble, everyone, each one, are to have a hymn or a word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. The word, everyone, it knew no gender limitations. Okay, so we're going to kind of summarize this little nutshell version here. So just digging a little bit deeper here into history and culture. This is a quote from a book called I Suffer Not by Kroger and Kroger. The Greek-speaking Jews who prepared a Greek version of the Hebrew scriptures called the Septuagint, they saw a remarkable correlation between the word silence and submission. There are 3 places in Psalms where the Hebrew text speaks of being silent unto Yahuwah. In each case, translators rendered this by the Greek verb meaning to submit oneself. The original implication is one of attentiveness and receptivity to Yahuwah. Okay, the Psalms, if you want to jot them down and look them up later, the 3 Psalms he's talking about here is Psalms 37:7, or chapter 62, verse 1, and chapter 62, verse 5. And you can look those up later. So it seems applicable here that Paul simply had in mind the Old Testament idea of waiting on Yahuwah, or of humility towards Yahuwah, the very same thing being required of men. He was telling the women that they were accepted as full partners in the gospel and given the privilege to minister. They had new freedom in Yahusha. However, the same self-submission to him is expected from them as from the men. Okay. So that about wraps
that
up
is
our
a
nutshell.
Yeah, there's just one more summary, right, Jeanette? And that's a nutshell. So let's hear it.
Okay, Paul's conclusion in comparison to Yahuwah's required obedience. The intent of this study is to emphasize obedience to Yahuwah's commands. The KJV reference to obedience in 1 Corinthians 14:34 has been grossly misleading in its translation. The instruction to be orderly in the assembly is not for women only, nor is it referencing obedience towards others who are gathered at the assembly. Yeah, that's worth saying. So let's return to the real intent of this study now.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a bunny trail, but we needed that bunny trail because that one verse didn't really fit in with those other 11. So this is just kind of a little review slide that Todd wanted us to kind of ponder over for a little bit. Comparison of the Hebrew and the Greek between these words obey, obeyed, and obeying. And remember, I told you that in the Hebrew, 8085 is Shema. Okay, this actual word number is used 1160 times, but with other words than obedient. Remember that I only gave you, what was it, 8 of them in the Old Testament with the word obedient, and 40 times it's used with obey, which both mean to hear intelligently and to obey. There's also 3349. It's used 1 time, and it means to obey, a gathering of the obedient. And then 4928, there's 3 times that it's used, and it also means a guard, an obedient guard. It's very interesting, this word guard, how it keeps coming up with the word obedient. And then in the Greek, of course, it expands it quite a bit more. I don't think it really gives us too much more meaning, but 4 times for to be persuaded by a ruler, you obey that way. You know, you're the puppet on the strings, right? And then 16 times to willfully disbelieve and disobey. This is kind of the opposite. And 56 times to obey through a convincing argument. You were persuaded again, almost the same as this one up here. Being persuaded, this is by a ruler though. And then 21 times be obedient. 3 times submissive due to intently listening, and 15 times attentive hearkening through learned obedience. So a little bit of a different idea there in the New Testament, the Greek. So it is time to consider, when concepts are mentioned numerous times, do you think it is important to Yahuwah that we pay strict attention to what his word is saying? In other words, is every word of scripture to be paid attention to? Or are there some of those scriptures you can cut out with your scissors? But when it comes to obedience, I think that we need to keep our eyes wide open, because every word in scripture is important, especially when it comes to the everlasting blood ratified book of the covenant. So this is some of Todd's notes that he sent, and I didn't have the the paleo letters to be able to put on. So I just clipped it out. And he wanted to show you a little paleo comparison between 3349 and 3348. Now, 3348 means to obey, and 3349 is a gathering of the obedient, just a little bit different there. So he's showing you here, and he's got gathering to obey, and 3348 means to obey. And now he's giving you some of the paleo, and I'm sorry, I can't help you too much with this, but you can see how they're almost exactly the same. Do you see that? Just one different here, okay? The last character of 3349. 3349 is gathering to obey. So what we have is that those that are gathering to obey are being obedient, right? Basically, you can see what's happening here in the paleo. Really nice, because you don't see that in the English or probably any other language. So did you notice that those who obey are in a special gathering? Just kind of an interesting concept there. I just wanted to put together a little chart. Todd had given me quite a few numbers on pages, and I just felt, well, I'll just put it into a little chart so you can see it a little bit better. But of course, you're familiar with Shema 8085 and its usage of that many times. But in the, I believe this is the King James version. And I think if you had other translations, these numbers might differ. But for, I believe it's for King James, you have 34 usages of obeyed, 5 of obeyest, 3 for obeyeth, 2 for obeying. There is nothing for obedience, and obeisance not under that number. Okay, so you add them up, 39, 44 times, okay, where these words around obey are used. 7812, that is the word that connects to obeisance, and there's only 9 usages in the Hebrew, only 9. In the Greek, for 5219, for these words, these very same words up here, you have 7 obeyed, 2, you can see what they are, and you add them all up, 7, 9, 10, 13, and another 12, that's 25. Okay, not quite as many, but you can see how they add up. I actually thought that there was going to be way more references than that. I somehow thought that there would be hundreds of them, but there isn't. But the point is being made that just obey. When you hear, you do. That's obedience. So as you can easily see, 8085 Shema, that is the main Hebrew word for obedient. Right there. That's the main one. Many, many more times in the Old Testament than in the New. And it means to hear intelligently, often with the implication of attention and obedience. That's your word for obey, Shema. Now, I don't know if Tim is with us or not to do some of these slides. I know he's had trouble with his internet, but if he's there, he can just let us know, and I'll just continue on. But the Ancient Hebrew Lexicon by Jeff Benner. Are you there, Tim?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Oh, good. Okay. You're going to help us with quite a few slides here. And these are, I'm glad you're here because I would have just not done justice to them. So thank you very much. Thank you, Yah, for getting that internet working.
I like to read again what we saw on the last slide there. It said to hear, to listen intelligently. How do you listen intelligently? Yeah, at the very bottom there, to hear intelligently. How do we do that? What does that mean? Hear intelligently. Just wanted to bring that to our attention here. We're going to be looking at some definitions coming up here real quick. Ancient Hebrew Lexicon by Jeff A. Benner. Obedient, it's a verb in the prime root. Afraid, fear, dread, terribly, break affright, oppress, prevail, and terrified. Now to look at and compare with obeisance, it too is a verb and it's an action to bow, to pay homage to another one by bowing low or getting on the knees with the face to the ground. And worship, bow and obeisance, reverence, fall, stoop, and crouch. And that's Strong's 7812 prime root and 7812 shacha. Now we're going to look at obey, and it's a noun in the feminine way in collection. The KJV has it as gathering and obey. Strong's 3349, and it's from H3348, an unused root to obey and be obedient. There's 6 commands to be obedient and 4 great benefits of obedience. We see that clearly in Joshua 1:6-9. And Joshua is a phenomenal book. Commands and blessings of Joshua 1:6-9. Be strong and of a good courage, for unto this people shalt thou divide for an inheritance the land, which I swear unto their fathers to give them. Only be thou strong and very courageous, that thou mayest observe to do according to all the law. I'll read that again, that thou mayest observe to do according to all the law, which Moshe thy servant commanded thee. Turn not from it to the right hand or to the left, that thou mayest prosper whithersoever thou goest. This book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then thou shalt make the way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success. Have I not commanded thee? Be strong and of a good courage. Be not afraid, neither be dismayed. For Yahuwah thy Elohim is with thee, whithersoever thou goest. And I think we need to read verse 9 again when we look at where this world is going and what's happening with this world and what the scriptures tell us of what is coming. Let me read verse 9 again with this in our mind. Have I not commanded thee? That's a command. This is not a suggestion. Be strong and of a good courage. And then the big one, be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed. For Yahuwah thy Elohim is with thee, whithersoever thou goest. And that means even in the fiery furnace. This is the secret to obedience. Be strong and of good courage, which in turn is the secret of success. Verse 8, a command and promise of Yahuwah. Psalms 1:3-4. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. Blessings of obedience. Yes. Hebrew Shema in other lexicons. We're going to have a look at some here. Shema consists of Shin, Mem, Ayin. And you see those letters, they go from right to left in the Hebrew. Shin, Mem, Ayin, the Paleo. We will next investigate 6 references for Shema. Number 1 will be the etymological dictionary of the Hebrew language. Number 2 is going to be the Hebrew English lexicon by J. Parkhurst. I believe that's from 1762. And Gesenius lexicon, we find this one available in the Blue Letter Bible. And the Hebrew and English lexicon of the First Covenant from 1906. And we'll go see the Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew lexicon, and we'll finally look at the Cole and Baumgartner lexicon for this word, Shema. Lots of definitions, and there's lots of pages of information, and these pages are littered with texts that you can go through and look at all the different applications of this word, Shema. Is Shema just to listen? like the Western mindset? Or is there more? What is the complete meaning to Shema? And what about the word summon? Can we be summoned on something we listened to? Or is there an action required as a result of this listening? Shema, to listen and act accordingly. That's the full meaning of this word. That's what I learned a long time ago, and we're going to go through these definitions from the lexicons and see if it's so. Maybe I'm wrong. Will we see this concept in the definitions? To be summoned is to be held accountable for actions taken. This is serious business. We cannot take this lightly. So the first one is the etymological dictionary of the Hebrew language. Once again, Shema. On the left, you'll see on the blue underline, he fulfilled one's advice. Is that just listening when you fulfill one's advice? How about next one down, was obeyed? How do you obey to what you listen to? And then there is the red underline, summoned. This is the big one. This is accountability, summoned. Then down farther, he assembled. That's a gathering, and summoned. So why would a person be summoned for what you heard? On the right, Shema, the three biblical passages, and we'll see that in Deuteronomy 6, 4-9, chapter 11, 13-21, and Numbers 15, 37-41, and it is proclaiming the belief in the unity of Yahuwah. Now, if they're proclaiming the belief by the word Shema, does it mean just to listen? What else is there to Shema? What is there to be accountable for? The Shema of Yahuwah, Deuteronomy 6, 4-9. Hear, O Yisrael, Yahuwah our Elohim, Yahuwah is one. Going to read that again. Hear, O Yisrael, Yahuwah our Elohim, Yahuwah is one. And you shall love Yahuwah your Elohim with all your heart and with all your being and with all your might. That does not mean half-heartedly. And these words which I command, and these words which I am commanding you today shall be in your heart, and you shall impress upon your children, and shall speak of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. That covers a pretty broad spectrum. And shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. And you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Deuteronomy 11, 13-21. And it shall come to pass, if ye shall hearken diligently unto my commandments, which I command you this day, to love Yahuwah your Elohim, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, that I will give you the rain of your land in his due season, the first rain and the latter rain, that thou mayest gather in thy corn, and thy wine, and thine oil. And I will send grass in thy fields for thy cattle, that thou mayest eat and be full. Take heed to guard yourselves, that your heart be not deceived, and ye turn aside and serve other gods and worship them. And then Yahuwah's wrath will be kindled against you, and he shut up the heaven, and there be no rain, and that the land yield not her fruit, lest ye perish quickly from off the good land which Yahuwah giveth you. And when it says that there be no rain, can that pertain to the Ruach also? An outpouring of the Ruach? If we reject his ways, will he cut off our access to the Ruach? Just a thought. Therefore shall ye lay up my words in your heart and your soul, and bind them for a sign upon your hand, that they may be as frontlets between your eyes. And ye shall teach them your children, speaking of them, when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. And thou shalt write them upon the doorposts of thine house, and upon thy gates, that your days may be multiplied, and the days of your children, in the land which Yahuwah sware unto your fathers to give them, as the days of heaven upon the earth. And just in case Yisrael would not listen and obey, let's have a look here. Numbers 15:37 to 41. The extra book of the law commands that were temporary. Verse 37. And Yahuwah spake unto Moshe, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and bid them that they should make fringes, and bid them that they make them fringes in the borders of their garments throughout their generations, and that they put upon the fringe of the borders a ribbon of blue. And it shall be unto you for a fringe, that ye may look upon it, and remember all the commands of Yahuwah, and do them, and that ye seek not after your own heart and your own eyes, after which ye use to go a whoring, that ye may remember and do all my commands, and be holy, right, and be Kodesh unto your Elohim. For I am Yahuwah your Elohim, which brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your Elohim. I am Yahuwah your Elohim. So let's look at this Hebrew English lexicon by J. Parkhurst. It's from 1762, and I have learned to have a great appreciation for this lexicon. Great. On the left-hand side, we're going to look at the dark blue underline. This is one of the definitions for Shema. Muster by proclamation. That is a gathering. You call together. There is action here. It's not just a hearing. This is an assembly to get together for a reason. Down at the bottom, we see it again. Also a mustering by proclamation. On the right-hand side, hearken, to listen to, mind. Now the big one, obey. Why do we find obey in Shema? Could that be part of listen and act accordingly? The obedience portion of listening? I'm quite certain it is. Listening isn't just hearing, it is action. Here is the Gesenius lexicon, and it's out of the Blue Letter Bible. Go down to the first underline in the dark blue. To attend to any person or thing. Shema. What? Why? I thought Shema was just to listen. Here we see to attend to any person or thing. There's an action. To hear, but not only to hear, and answer. There is a reply, a response. It is a requirement that we have a response. Down to the bottom red line, to obey, to give heed. That's not just listening. This is a required action, to give heed, act accordingly. On the right-hand side, at the top middle of that top box, to be regarded, to be cared. These are actions. To render obedience, to obey. Yes, we're still looking at the word Shema, and it has to obey. Down in the bottom box, under the blue, to call, Now the big one, to summon. What happens when you get summoned into court? You have to answer. You have to be accountable. To call, to summon. Shema. To be summoned is to be positively required to declare the direct consequential results of one's actions upon hearing certain commands and or proclamations. It is an undeniable call to action. This is not just hearing. This is to listen and to act accordingly. To sidestep or avoid decisive action is not optional. When you are summoned, it is a positive thing. You must have an action. Based on William Jasenius, and this is translated by Edward Robinson. So we look on the left-hand side under the red line, to obey. Wow, Shema, listen, to hear and to obey. Down midway down under the blue, to hearken. What does hearken mean? Pay attention with your actions. And in the middle column, to hear and answer. To hear and have a reaction. There must be a response to answer. To hearken, to hear and obey. Yes, not just listen, we must have an action. Listen and act accordingly. That is Shema. So this word is a pretty involved word. It's not just hearing. And again, this is another entry from the one that's translated by Edward Robinson. Top left-hand corner in the red oval, to show oneself obedient, to obey. And you look just above it and you'll see the letters, Shin, Mem, Ayin, Shema. And yet it says to be obedient and to obey. Next one down, to show oneself obedient, to obey. To show oneself obedient is to produce a positive action. Obedience is a requirement. It's not optional. The next on the left-hand side, Shema. Again, to show oneself obedient, to obey. And in the red box or the red oval below, we see that Saul called all the people to war. That word Shema is there. Shema is a call to physical duty. We must have an action. We are called to be accountable for our actions. And here in the last one is the lexicon of Kohler Baumgartner. Actually, I don't think it's the last one. I think there's one more. In the highlighted, to comply and obey. To comply to a positive notion is to take decisive action, both psychological and physical. To Shema requires action, otherwise Shema will not be accomplished. If we do not have a positive response and action, we have not Shema. And here again from the Kohler and Baumgartner lexicon, Shema. To be heard, meaning to become obedient. When they heard of me, they obeyed. 2 Samuel 22:45. We compare that with Psalms 18:45. As soon as they had heard of me, they obeyed me. Or alternatively, when they had only heard of me, they obeyed me. Does it get any clearer than that? Hearing must be followed through with obedience. It's not optional, not according to the Hebrew language.
Well, Tim, I think we got the point. It's just all over the place when you look at those definitions. And so as we continue on in the PowerPoint, and I want to thank you so much for putting all that work into gathering up all those references, because those men from ages past really did understand. Well, why is it so important to be obedient? And can't we decide to be obedient just kind of before the end of time, or is it okay just to kind of be disobedient once in a while? Does it really matter? So that's what we want to look at right now. And this could be another whole study. I've just chosen 8 important reasons why it's important to be obedient right now. Well, Yahusha calls us to obey. That's a very good reason. In Yahusha, we find the perfect model of obedience. As his disciples, we follow his example as well as his commands, and our motivation for obedience is love towards him for everything that he's done for us. In John 14, 15, and 21, this is from the scriptures, the 2009 version, okay? Look what it says. If you love me, you shall guard my commandments. He who possesses my commands and guards them, it is he who loves me. And he who loves me shall be loved by my Father, and I shall love him and manifest myself to him. And I have this little guard here as a reminder that there is something else to do besides just being obedient. And as we've already noticed, obedience is also an act of worship. And while the scriptures place a really strong emphasis on obedience, it's critical to remember that believers are not justified by just their obedience. Salvation is a free gift of Yahuwah, but true obedience flows from a heart of gratitude for the grace that we've received from Yahusha and our restoration to him. So our love response for what he's done for us is to obey the commands that he has given to us so he can bless us. In Romans 12:1, I call upon you, therefore, brothers, through the compassion of Elohim, to present your bodies a living sacrifice set apart, well-pleasing to Elohim, your reasonable worship. Set apart. We want to be different. We want to follow Yahusha, not follow the ways of the world. Point number 3, Yahusha rewards obedience. That's all over the place. Over and over again in the scriptures, you're going to read that Yahuwah blesses and rewards obedience. Genesis 22:18, just one example here to start with in the Torah. And in your seed, all nations of the earth shall be blessed because you have obeyed my voice. And trust me, when Yahuwah blesses, he really blesses. In Luke 11:28, and Yahusha said, blessed rather are those hearing the word of Elohim and watching over it. But you know, we can't just listen to Yahuwah's word. We have to also do what it says. That's what Tim was talking about. There's an action. After you listen, you do. There's an action, and that's called Shema. What good is it to listen if you're not going to obey? And when you look very carefully into the perfect law that sets you free, and when you do what it says, and you don't forget what you heard, then Yahuwah can bless you for doing it. That is opening the floodgate so that he can bless you. In James 1, verses 22 to 25, and become doers of the word, not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. Because if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and he goes away, and he immediately forgets what he was like. But he that looketh into the perfect Torah, that of freedom, and he continues in it, not becoming a hearer that forgets, but a doer of work, this one shall be blessed in his doing of the Torah. It reads differently in the scriptures. I just find that it reads quite a bit differently from the King James. Point number 4, obedience to Yahuwah proves our love. And I found that in the books of 1st and 2nd John, it very clearly explains that obedience to Yahuwah demonstrates our love for him. Loving Yahuwah implies following his commands. Let's take a look at what it has to say in 1 John 5, 2 and 3. By this we know that we love the children of Elohim. When we love Elohim, and look at that, guard his commands. For this is the love of Elohim, that we guard his commands, and his commands are not heavy. And 2 John 6, and this is the love, that we walk according to his commands. This is the command, that as you have heard from the beginning, you should walk in it. You should do it. Hear and do. Shema. Yeah, it's just such a simple concept. Number 5, obedience to Yahuwah demonstrates faith. Yes, it demonstrates our trust and our faith in him. We're back to 1 John again. You'll find these concepts in John, the Gospel of John, and 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, all over the place. 1 John 2, verses 3 to 6. And by this we know that we know him if we guard his commands. The one who says, I know him, and does not guard his commands is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whoever guards his word, truly the love of Elohim has been perfected in him. And by this we know that we are in him. And the one who says he stays in him ought himself also to walk even as he walked. So John has a lot of good counsel. That's why it's a good idea to read his books. Point number 6, obedience is better than sacrifice. You've all heard that before. And that phrase has perplexed many. It can only be understood from an Old Testament perspective. The law required that the Israelite people to offer sacrifices to Yahuwah. They had a lot of sacrifices to offer to him, and specifically on Shabbats and the feasts and festivals. But those sacrifices and offerings were never intended to take the place of obedience. In 1 Samuel 15, 22 and 23, then Samuel said, does Yahuwah delight in ascending offerings and slaughterings, as in the obeying of the voice of Yahuwah? Look, to obey is better than a slaughtering. To heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of divination, and stubbornness is as wickedness and idolatry. I believe in the King James it says, rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. That really brings the point home. Point number 7, disobedience leads to sin and death. And that disobedience of Adam, it definitely brought sin and death into the world. And this is the basis of the term original sin. I'm not telling you anything new. It's just to see the exact opposite of obedience. But because of Yahusha's perfect obedience, that restores our fellowship with Yahuwah for everyone who believes in him and does what he asks us to do. Romans 5:19, for as through the disobedience of one man, that was Adam, many were made sinners, so also through the obedience of one, many shall be made righteous. And 1 Corinthians 15:22, for as all in Adam die, so also shall all be made alive in Messiah. Praise Yah for that. And the last point that we're going to have in this little section is, through obedience, we experience the blessings of set-apart living. And those that have been obedient, they have experienced these blessings, and they have testimonies to give of why it was worth it. Yes, Yahuwah rewards us. He said, yes, this is a good idea. Only Yahusha is perfect. Therefore, only he could walk in sinless, perfect obedience. But as we allow Ruach Elohim to transform us from within, we grow in holiness or kodeshness. This is the process of sanctification, and that happens every day, which can also be described as a spiritual growth from day to day. And the more we read Yahuwah's word, and the more time that we spend with him and allow his Ruach to change us from within, the more we grow in obedience and holiness. And in fact, the more we want to grow in obedience and holiness. It's not that, do we have to do this? It's like, I love to do this. I love to be obedient to your word. It's something that we want to do, not that we have to do. David knew how to word it in Psalms 119. Blessed are the perfect in the way who walk in the Torah of Yahuwah. Exclamation mark right there. Blessed are those who observe his witnesses, who seek him with all the heart. Yes, they shall do no unrighteousness. Did you see that? They shall do no unrighteousness. They shall walk in his ways. You have commanded us to guard your orders diligently. Oh, that my ways were established to guard your laws. Then I would not be ashamed when I look into all your commands. I thank you with uprightness of heart. When I learn the right rulings of your righteousness, I guard your laws. Oh, do not leave me entirely. That was the plea of David in Psalms 119, a whole 175 verses. Go read it. In 2 Corinthians 7:1, Paul says, having then these promises, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all defilement of the flesh and spirit, perfecting set apartness in the fear of Elohim. Well, the above verse says, let us work toward complete set apartness. That's a good idea, complete holiness. But we don't learn obedience overnight. It's a lifelong process, and we pursue every day to make it our goal. Well, let's just take a couple of slides here to look at this word guard. I like 1 Corinthians 16:13. It says, be on your guard. Stand firm in the faith. Be courageous and strong. That's just about exactly what Yahuwah told to Joshua. Be strong and courageous. Like, be on your guard. I want to ask you the question. Did you notice how many times the word guard was used for the word keep? Guard. Usually the word keep is used like this in John 14:25. You all know this. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. In John 14:15, doesn't keep mean to keep holy, keep kodesh, or keep set apart? Doesn't keep mean something else? I wondered about that. It says, if you love me, keep my commandments. Well, there's the commandments right there in the book of the everlasting covenant. Those are the laws. But I decided to ask the question, what is the difference between keep the commandments and guard the commandments? There seems to be a little bit of a difference here. But this is what we read in Deuteronomy 6:17. You shall diligently keep the commandments of Yahuwah your Elohim, and his testimonies and his statutes, which he hath commanded thee. Well, all you have to do is go look up the word keep in the Hebrew and see what it has to say. It's a primitive root, and look what it says, properly to hedge about, like with thorns, a guard, generally to protect. It's to hedge it about with thorns so nothing can get in there, to guard it. We're talking about the commandments here. Hedge them up, guard them, and protect them. That sounds different than keep the commandments the way that I was taught. Well, what about the word keep in the New Testament, in the restored covenant? Because John uses guard quite a bit in the Gospel of John and in 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. It's written, if you love me, keep my commandments. You'll read that all over the place. Well, I decided I'd go look up the word keep in the Greek and see what it has to say. And it says a watch. It says to guard from loss or to guard from an injury. Properly, keep means to keep your eye upon it. Look at it, watch what's going on. And if you look at the word guard in the Webster's, it means to keep it, preserve, and defend. Well, that's a little bit different than what I was taught just about my whole life. I never looked at it that way before. So I came to this conclusion. When it comes to Yahuwah's instructions, we are admonished to understand them and obey them continually. I like it the way it's worded this way. If you love me, guard my commandments. Don't you like that? That just sounds a little bit different. It sounds like there's something there for us to do as well. Well, I just have to say, what do you think, everybody? What do you think about guard my commandments? Do you think that's something that we should be pondering on a little bit more? Shall we guard the covenant from a variety of things? And I just made a short list here today. Shall we guard the covenant from being tampered with? Shall we guard the covenant from being added to and taken away, anything taken out of it? This is the book of the covenant that's everlasting, that's been blood ratified. Shall we guard the covenant from traditional counterfeits? What about compromise? What about guarding the covenant from being lost? Remember in the Old Testament, they lost the instructions, and then one day they found them and how happy they were. We have to guard the covenant that it's not lost. What about being ignored? And what about being misrepresented? And there's probably a whole lot more things that you could add to the list. But shall we think about guarding the covenant, not just keeping it and obeying it, but guarding it? That's something. That is something else to think about. Wonderful things that we have been finding in this obedience study. But there are benefits of obedience, and you can read them right there in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 1 to 14. But we're going to just do a little introduction of just the first two verses here right now to get started. And it shall be, if you diligently obey the voice of Yahuwah your Elohim, to guard, to do all his commands, which I command you today, that Yahuwah your Elohim shall set you high above all nations of the earth. And all these blessings, the ones that are going to follow, all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you if you shall obey the voice of Yahuwah your Elohim. He's just waiting to bless us. So, well, we just happened to read this chapter yesterday. It's very long. Chapter 28 has 68 verses. And guess what? The first 14 verses are about obedience. And the last of them, 2/3 of it, is about curses for disobedience. In Deuteronomy 28:13, it says, and Yahuwah shall make you the head and not the tail. And you shall be only on the top and not beneath. If you obey the commands, if you Shema the commands of Yahuwah your Elohim, which I command you today, look what it says, to guard and do them. Well, I just have a little short list here of curses and obedience, and the consequences of Yahuwah are, if you obey, he has blessings, and if you disobey, it's not that he wants to send the curses, but you are the one that opens the door. We are the ones that open the door for the enemy to come in and heap curses upon us for our disobedience. So Yahuwah says you're going to be blessed in the city and the country, but not if you're disobedient. If you're obedient, you will be fertile. You'll have many, many children, but not if you're disobedient. He said, if you want to be disobedient, your crops are going to be destroyed. On the other hand, you could have plentiful crops. Make a choice. What about your livestock? If you are disobedient and don't guard my laws, your livestock won't be fertile. But you choose to be obedient, you come under the blessing of a fertile livestock. Remember the stories of Jacob. Disobedience, there's scarcity of bread and grain. Not so. If you're obedient, there's an abundance of bread and grain. What about disobedience? You're cursed coming in and you're cursed going out. And it's the exact opposite. If you're obedient, you're blessed coming in and blessed going out. And he said you would defeat your enemies. But if you're cursed, the enemies are going to defeat you. And he also said that he would establish you as Yahuwah's holy people. That's segula, precious, precious. But if you're disobedient, he said, you'll be ridiculed by other nations. You'll be a laughing stock, and you'll be filled with fear and despair. But if you're obedient, the other nations are going to fear you. Just imagine. What about getting all that good rain, the former and the latter rain, so that your crops could be full and complete and plump? But if you're disobedient, he said, you're going to have powder and dust instead of rain. And he also said, you're allowed to lend to the other nations rather than borrow. But if you're under the curses of disobedience, he said, you're going to be the one that has to pay the interest to the other. And you're the one that has to borrow. And of course, being obedient, you're the head and not the tail. And then there's another one here, afflicted with many diseases. Whereas being obedient, he said he would remove the diseases of the Egyptians. And we are praying that for us as we are learning this today. Well, let's go into Jeremiah 23. Todd wanted us to look at Jeremiah 23, and I had chosen not to read the verses of the chapter, but I did find some really nice commentary from Matthew Henry, and I thought it was worthwhile to go through that. And you can read the verses in Jeremiah 23 later. But basically in 23 verse 1, this is what it says. Woe be to the pastors that destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture, saith Yah. Woe be unto them. You don't want a woe cast onto you. No way. So for the first 8 verses of Jeremiah, this is just a little summary. Woe be to those who are appointed to feed Yah's people, but they take no concern to do them any good whatsoever. Though only a remnant of Yah's flock is left, he's going to find them no matter where they are. All the spiritual seed of believing Abraham and praying Jacob shall be protected and shall be saved from the guilt and the dominion of the disobedience. Yahusha's obedience unto death is the justifying righteousness of believers. Their sanctification as the source of all their personal obedience, hear and do, is the effect of their union with him and of the supply of the Ruach. This is all about Shema, hear and obey, hear and do. That's obedience. In Jeremiah 23, verses 9 to 22, we'll just summarize it up very, very quickly. The false prophets of Samaria had deluded the Israelites into idolatries. Yet the false prophets of Jerusalem were guilty of more horrible wickedness by which the people were made bold to live in continual disobedience. Did you hear that? It was the false prophets that moved the people into continual disobedience. And I dare say today it's even worse than that. These false teachers will suffer the most bitter part of Yahuwah's indignation. And it was their choice, by the way. Why? Because they chose to believe that there was no harm in being disobedient. And they practiced accordingly, and they also taught others to follow. And we're finding the same thing in nominal Christianity and most of the religions of the world today. They are teaching their flock to follow them. What a sadness. We're continuing with these verses and a look at the leadership in Jeremiah 23. These false prophets, they led men to be quiet in their disobedience. All those who are resolved to follow in such evil ways will justly be given up to what? To believe a strong delusion. The time is coming when they will reflect on their folly and unbelief with remorse because they refuse to receive any revelation of Torah, the prophets, or the New Testament, the restored covenant. The day is coming when they're going to be sorry that they didn't take a closer look. We all know this, and we pray for them that we can reach them to open their mind. Thankfully, the faithful teachings and the examples of those true prophets and the true teachers lead many to repentance, faith, and righteousness. So how many out there are blindly obeying the authority, and the authoritative figure is walking and just taking them right off the edge of the cliff, and they're blind. They don't even know what's happening. So many of them out there. In Jeremiah 23:24, can any hide himself in secret places that I shall not see him, saith Yahuwah? Do not I feel heaven and earth, saith Yahuwah? Can anybody hide from me? Can anybody get away from my eye? No, false teachers cannot escape Yahuwah's all-seeing eye. Will they never see what judgments they prepare for themselves? I just wonder if they read Deuteronomy 28 to see what the blessings and the curses are. I don't know that they're reading Torah at all. There is a vast difference between their false teachings and the rightly divided truths found in the scriptures. And the question is always, what about the sheep? How are the sheep going to discern? How do the people discern the bad from the good if they don't know how to rightly divide the truth? How do the people know if their leaders do not teach them the Torah and how to rightly divide the truth? Jeremiah 23:28 is worth reading. The prophet who has a dream, let him relate the dream, and he who has my word, let him speak my word in truth. What is the chaff to the wheat, declares Yahuwah. There's nothing in the chaff, it's dead. There's nothing in there at all. It's the wheat that has the strength and the nourishment. Jeremiah 23:29, is not my word like a fire, declares Yahuwah, and like a hammer that shatters a rock? Yes, Yahuwah's word is no smooth, lulling, deceitful message. It's very, very clear what he wants us to do. And the unhumbled heart of a man is sometimes like a rock, and if it is not melted by the word of Yah as a fire, it is going to have to be broken to pieces, just like a hammer comes after it. Who can be safe? Who can be at ease when one lives in direct disobedience to what he's asked us to do? By Yah's faithfulness and through his word, truth may certainly and easily be distinguished from false doctrines and disobedience of every false teacher. But it takes a little bit of work, doesn't it? To get back and start reading the word and reading the words for actually what they really do say, and learning how to teach yourself how to study. It is a little bit of work because a lot of our leaders just aren't doing it. There's a couple of quotes here that I thought were really interesting. Obedience is the burial of the will and the resurrection of humility. That's from John Climacus. And Matthew Henry, he says, love is the root, obedience is the fruit. Is that not true? Absolutely. And from C.S. Lewis, a very favorite author, obedience is the key that opens every door. We talked about that earlier, that obedience was a key. And you know what? Delayed obedience is disobedience, short and simple. If you delay on your obedience, it is simply disobedience. There's no other way around it. Well, Todd wanted me to share some things with you about the lepers. So is it possible to learn any lessons of obedience from lepers? This is the lepers. It's in the story of 2 Kings, verses 6 and 7. And in these two chapters, we find that there is trouble in the land of Samaria by the king of Syria. The people inside the besieged city were definitely starving, as were the lepers outside the city. And I don't want to go into the details of what was happening, but as you can well imagine, there wasn't any food left, and you know what they were eating. They weren't eating what they were supposed to be eating. But by a miracle of Yahuwah, the Syrians fled, leaving behind all kinds of food, surprising even the lepers. How did the obedient lepers bless the people that had discarded them and thrown them outside the city? They didn't want to have anything to do with those lepers. Well, as we said, times were very tough, and Samaria was under a siege, and the people that were inside the locked walls, they thought that they were safe, but they were starving. And the lepers, who they had considered were unclean, they didn't want to have anything to do with them, they tossed them outside the city. Well, here's the lepers outside the city. They have no choice. And they thought, well, we may as well go and look for some food or we're going to die. And when they looked for food, you know the story, it was provided. It's such a neat story. It's actually a day start study of when the day begins. But these unclean lepers were the ones, they were the ones that brought the good report of free food to those starving inside the walls of the city. Do you remember that Yahuwah, he just scared the Syrian army right to bits, and they just fled for their lives, and there was just food all over in their camps. And the lepers had lots of food, and they were eating away, and they were thinking, wait a second, we need to share this with our brothers. And that day, many people were thankful for the lepers. Well, I think there's a leper lesson for everybody in that story. It simply is, if you get something, you give it away. You share it. Well, how does this testimony relate to us today? Are we Yahuwah's children? Are we finding bread at the end times? Are we finding spiritual bread that nourishes us? Well, you know, in the end times, we're going to have some tough times as well. And we could be under a siege in a spiritual way. Lots of Christians, they think that they're safe, locked behind the walls of their churches, their fellowships, or their assemblies. But you know, there's many of them that are starving. Some of them are just warming the pew. And Bible students are finding newly discovered truths. They're tossed out. They're considered unclean, and they're shunned by their fellow church members. Have you seen this happen to any of your friends? Maybe it happened to you. But these dear ones, these dear Bible students, they have no other choice. And what do? They go and search for living bread, because if they don't, they know they're going to die spiritually. And when they search, Yahuwah provides them with the very best bread that there could possibly be. And although that they are labeled as unclean, they attempt to share their treasured food with starving souls in the church. But unlike the story of the lepers, many in the churches and fellowships are not thankful for the living bread of those so-called unclean people. So will we be subjected to a leper experience? You know, it could just happen that we can get into the same situation. We can experience the leper experience. We want to share what we have found, but we're simply tossed out. Jeanette, would you go ahead and read the next 4 slides for me, or 5?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's hear some counsel from 1 Thessalonians 5. But of the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I write unto you. But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day should overtake you as a thief. For they that sleep, sleep in the night, and they that be drunken are drunken in the night. Therefore, let us not sleep as do others, but let us watch and be sober. Ye are all the children of light and the children of the day. We are not of the night nor of the darkness. So there's a lesson in it here for us. If you learn, go teach. The next one's coming very slowly. Okay, let's have a look at this from 2 Timothy 2. It's a mandate for a peculiar people. You know, that Segula people that we always talk about. And the things that you have heard from me among many witnesses, commit these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. Consider what I say, and may Yahuwah give you understanding in all things. Be diligent to present yourself approved to Yahuwah, a worker who does not need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And a servant of Yahuwah must not quarrel, but be gentle to all, able to teach, patient, in humility, correcting those who are in opposition. If Yahuwah perhaps will grant them repentance so that they may know the truth. Okay. Highest words of recommendation. 1 Peter 3:15 and Colossians 4:6. But sanctify Yahuwah in your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer To every man that asks you a reason of the hope that is in you, with meekness and fear. And let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer every man. And how easy it is to share what we have learned if we keep it simple. Share gently, like Yahusha did, remembering everyone has a choice. Share what you have found, but allow the Ruach to convict. However, do remember, when defending what one considers to be sound biblical principles, in brackets here, that are considered as fundamental articles of faith, it is important to use sound biblical arguments that will endure the highest scrutiny in order to stay in alignment with Torah. Would the correct timing of the worship statutes qualify as a fundamental article of faith and obedience in these last days? And does that link to following our master completely, according to all of his covenant worship statutes and commandments?
Yes, and as we just begin now here to wrap up this study, what happens when Yahuwah's obedient cannot share light with those in darkness? There is some counsel from Ephesians 5, 11, and 13 that is sometimes hard to read, but this is what it says. And have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. All things that are reproved are made manifest by the light. For whatsoever doth make manifest is light. Rather expose it, expose the darkness. What does it mean when it says to reprove others? It's so difficult. It's very, very difficult. Well, the final goal is a peculiar people. And this is my favorite portion that links to Exodus 19, 4 and 5 in 1 Peter 2. But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that you should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. And Isaiah 9:2, the people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. That links to Matthew 4:16. That's a very interesting connection. Luke 8:17, for nothing is secret that shall not be made manifest, neither anything hid that shall not be known and come abroad. And also in Luke 12:2, for there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, neither hid that shall not be known. So all truths are going to be restored. We're going to know what they are someday. We might not have them all quite yet. But Yahuwah's peculiar people, they know how to rightly divide the truth. When they're following the Torah commands, they know how to rightly divide between the curses and the blessings. They know what it means to be obedient or disobedient. They know that obedience means to act quickly, to be cheerfully obedient, to be completely obedient, and to do what is right. And of course, obedience always goes the extra mile. They know all these things and they delightfully practice them. Well, we would just like to, all three of us, share this summary slide together. And Tim will go first, but what have we learned in this study about obedience and rightly dividing the word of truth? Tim, if you're there, I'll have you do the first column.
Shema. Shema means to stay or to obey and stay obedient. How? When we hear, we will complete the command by doing. This is the result of rightly dividing the word of truth for Shema.
Jeanette, you get number 2.
Okay. To be submissive or obedient. Everyone has the responsibility to be submissive and to be obedient.
Just like that, right, Jeanette?
Simple.
What about to keep or to guard? To keep the commandments means to Shema, to hear and act accordingly. To guard the commands means to protect them at all cost and pass the words intact down through the generations, so the rest of the generations can know. This is a message to Covenant Calendar members from Todd and his friends. The words of Jeremiah 23 declare in vivid expression what is going on in this world today. Being willing, that's an inward attitude, and obedient, that's the outward action, is preparation for Yah's kingdom. And he says, they say together, friends, stay close to our shepherd Yahusha. There is no other choice. Just stay close to him and his commands. And back to 1 Corinthians 16:13, be on your guard. Stand firm in the faith. Be courageous and be strong. And when you do all of that, you will be a king and a priest forever in his highest Melchizedek priesthood. What a promise. And Todd said, I want you to wrap it up with this. Be bold. Let your commitment to truth be so great that any punishment you receive for adhering to truth will what? Give you pleasure. He has said this to me so many times on the phone, and is in the hard situations that all of them are in. Let your commitment to truth be so great that you know you're not turning back, and it doesn't matter what punishment comes your way, that you are going to have pleasure in it. What does that mean? That means praising Yah. And he says, truth does not fight to have a place in the heart of man. It simply is going to present itself, and you can take it or leave it. It's just that simple. And as we wrap up today, Todd says, choose to stay on the path of obedience and walk in the light, for there is no darkness in his people, the bride of Yahusha. This is from your friends from Colorado. They're standing with you. The end.